She bought an old, forgotten bunker for next to nothing, thinking it was just another project. But when mechanic Kate Rhea stepped inside, she uncovered something far more valuable than she ever imagined. Armored vehicles, buried under layers of dust, each worth millions. What started as a simple purchase turned into an explosive journey of uncovering secrets, hidden treasures, and a legacy that was never meant to be found. This discovery would not only change her life, it would rewrite history itself. Before we dive in, let us know where you're watching from. And if you love stories of unexpected finds, buried treasure, and thrilling discoveries, hit that subscribe button, because tomorrow's episode uncovers an even bigger twist. You won't want to miss it. Let's get started. Kate Rhea had never been one to shy away from a challenge. As the owner of a small mechanic shop on the edge of town, she had learned how to fix just about anything that came through her doors. Rusted engines, faulty transmissions, even the occasional shattered dream in the form of a clunker barely worth the metal it was made of. But for the past few months, business had been slow. The phone barely rang, and the grease-stained floors of her shop seemed to mock her efforts. That morning, while sipping her lukewarm coffee and scrolling through a classifieds app on her phone, something caught her eye. It wasn't the usual car listings or parts for sale. No, this one was different. The headline read, "Abandoned storage unit, open auction, $500 starting bid." Kate's curiosity piqued. A storage unit auction wasn't anything special, but something about this one felt different. Perhaps it was the story behind it. Buried in the fine print unit, located on an old military base, long forgotten by its owners. The small print also mentioned a locked and heavily secured area in the back of the property, only accessible with a special key. She could practically hear the hum of the old overhead lights in her shop. This was a chance, a break, even if it was just for the thrill of it. Besides, how bad could it be? It wasn't like she had anything else to do that afternoon. The auction was set to start in an hour. After a moment's hesitation, Kate entered the bid. She won. The day Kate arrived at the storage facility, the air had a strange stillness to it. The property was situated on the outskirts of town, surrounded by overgrown grass and a half-dilapidated fence that seemed to struggle to stay upright. The place looked like it had been abandoned for years, maybe even decades. The building itself was a crumbling warehouse, a ghost of what it once might have been. A narrow path led to the back of the property, where a set of rusty gates blocked her view of what lay beyond. The key she'd received upon winning the auction felt heavy in her pocket, like it held the weight of a mystery she wasn't yet ready to solve. As she turned the key in the lock, there was a strange creak, the sound of decades of neglect. The gates opened slowly, and the sight beyond them took Kate's breath away. What she had thought was just an old storage area was in fact a hidden bunker, its concrete walls covered in ivy, its entrance buried beneath layers of dust and rusted steel. Inside, the air smelled of old leather, must, and something else, something metallic. As Kate walked deeper, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space, she first noticed the shadows. Something large, and perhaps once important, had been stored here. And then, she saw it a military-grade armored vehicle, coated in layers of dust, but unmistakable in its design. It looked like a tank of sorts, but smaller, sleeker. The turret, the thick armor, and the old camouflage paint made it look almost like a forgotten relic of some long-lost war. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't just junk. This was something far beyond what she had expected. Kate approached cautiously, her hand hovering over the surface. As her fingers brushed against the cold metal, she couldn't help but wonder what had brought these vehicles here, and why had they been left to rot. Suddenly, the realization hit her. This wasn't a junkyard find. This wasn't an old, broken-down truck to fix up for a weekend project. This was a discovery that could change everything. Her heart raced. She had no idea what she had just unearthed. The discovery was both exhilarating and overwhelming. Kate stood there, eyes wide, taking in the sight before her. Her instincts as a mechanic kicked in immediately. This wasn't just about finding a few old cars or broken-down equipment. This was military-grade machinery, built to withstand time and the most extreme conditions. She could practically hear the hum of engines that had been dormant for decades. There were more vehicles, hidden in the shadows, tanks, armored personnel carriers, and trucks, all covered in a thick layer of dust. Some were still partially covered by old tarps, while others stood naked, their metal surfaces tarnished but still impressive. The sheer scale of it all hit her as she took another step forward. How had these vehicles ended up here? Why were they left to deteriorate, abandoned in this forgotten corner of the world? Kate carefully moved closer to the nearest armored truck. Her gloved hands wiped away years of dust from the side, revealing the faded insignia of what seemed to be a military unit. The paint had long since peeled away in some spots, but the strength of the machine was still evident. There was something undeniably powerful about the way these vehicles had been built, a legacy of craftsmanship and strength. The faint glint of something under the truck caught her eye, and she knelt down. A metal box, slightly rusted but still intact, lay hidden beneath the chassis. She carefully pried it free, the weight of it surprising her. The box had a weathered label on it, but the words were faded beyond recognition. She opened it slowly, revealing a small collection of documents, old blueprints, maps, and photographs of the vehicles in their prime. Her mind raced. This wasn't just about the value of the vehicles. These were relics of a different time, hidden away for reasons she couldn't yet understand. And these papers, these faded documents, were a breadcrumb trail leading somewhere deeper, somewhere far more important than just a forgotten storage unit. Kate pulled out a photograph of a group of men standing proudly beside one of the vehicles, their uniforms pristine, their faces full of determination. These men had once been a part of something larger, something that was now buried in time. She paused for a moment, her thoughts clouded by questions. Who were these men? Why had the vehicles been hidden here? And, more importantly, why had no one come looking for them? The more she examined the photos and documents, the more it became clear. These weren't just military vehicles. They were a part of a secret history. A history that, for some reason, had been kept under wraps all these years. But there was something else. Something tugging at the back of her mind. A feeling of unease. As if these vehicles weren't the only thing buried in this place. And then it hit her. Kate wasn't the only one who knew about this bunker. And she wasn't the only one who wanted what was hidden inside. The feeling of unease grew as Kate carefully examined the photographs and documents. Each page revealed a deeper connection to the past. A secret military operation she had never heard of, tucked away in this forgotten bunker. The vehicles were part of something much larger, something more significant than a simple cache of war machines. She began to sense the weight of history pressing down on her. But before she could investigate further, her phone buzzed. It was a text message from one of her old contacts, a military historian she'd worked with in the past. She'd mentioned the storage unit to him casually during a conversation the week before, but never expected it to lead to anything serious. Still, she felt a strange sense of urgency as she read the message. I'm hearing whispers about some old military equipment being found. Sounds like it's tied to a covert operation. I'd be careful if I were you. Kate's stomach tightened. The more she uncovered, the more the situation seemed to spiral into something bigger than she could have imagined. Determined to understand what she had stumbled upon, she started doing some digging of her own. She went through every document in the box, each one seeming to connect to something more mysterious. Some of the blueprints appeared to be for modifications to the vehicles, extra armor, enhanced weapon systems, and other specialized designs. But there were also notes on a location, coordinates she couldn't quite place. She had to know more. The next morning, Kate packed up a few essential tools and set off toward the coordinates. She wasn't sure what she was looking for exactly, but something inside told her that the location marked on those papers would hold the next key. It was only a few hours' drive, but the deeper she drove into the forested area, the more unsettling the journey became. The roads narrowed, and the air grew thicker, like something was closing in around her. Finally, She reached the site, a secluded compound hidden among the trees. It looked like a small military base, though abandoned, with rusting equipment scattered around and the remains of a few old buildings half collapsed in the distance. There were no signs, no security, nothing to indicate that this place had ever been anything more than an overgrown field. Kate approached cautiously, her hands gripping the wheel tightly. Her mind raced. Why would the vehicles have been stored in such a remote location? Was this just a place to park them out of sight? Or was there something more sinister at play? She parked her truck near one of the old structures and stepped out into the silence. The only sound was the crunch of gravel beneath her boots. As she walked closer to the compound, she noticed something odd, small, barely visible markings on the ground that led toward a partially collapsed building. Her instincts told her to follow them, so she did. The markings, made with faded paint, led her to a rusted metal door half hidden by overgrown weeds. It seemed out of place, like it didn't belong there. Hesitating for just a moment, Kate pushed it open. The door creaked in protest, but it gave way, revealing another dark room beyond. What she saw inside made her breath catch in her throat. There, sitting beneath layers of dirt and debris, was a vast storage area filled with crates, boxes, and several more armored vehicles. Some partially covered, some completely exposed, all far more advanced and specialized than anything she had ever seen before. These weren't just relics. They were incredibly sophisticated pieces of military technology, far beyond anything the general public knew. Kate's heart raced. This was it. This was the heart of the operation, the place where the most secretive pieces of military history had been hidden for decades. But there was no time to process the discovery. She turned sharply as she heard the sound of footsteps approaching. Someone else was here. Someone who clearly didn't want her snooping around. Kate's breath caught. She was no longer alone, and whoever was out there was coming for the same thing she was. The footsteps grew louder, the crunch of gravel unmistakable in the silence of the compound. Kate's heart raced. She quickly scanned the dimly lit storage area, searching for an exit or a place to hide. There was no time to waste. Whoever was approaching wasn't coming to ask questions. She could feel it in her bones. She dove behind a pile of crates, trying to steady her breath as the footsteps drew nearer. The weight of the situation settled on her shoulders. This wasn't just some old military junkyard. These vehicles, these machines, were part of something much bigger, and someone clearly wanted them back. The crunching footsteps stopped, and Kate held her breath. A muffled voice came from the other side of the room. "You find anything yet?" Another voice, low and gruff, replied, "Nothing yet. But if she's here, she'll be after the same thing we are." Kate's pulse quickened. They know about the bunker. They're after the vehicles. Whoever these people were, they weren't just interested in a simple storage unit. They were part of something far more dangerous. And Kate was standing right in the middle of it. She crept carefully, inching her way towards the far wall. The air was thick with tension, every sound feeling like it would give her position away. She could hear them talking, their voices hushed but urgent. "Let's move quickly," the first voice said. "We don't have much time before someone else shows up. We need those vehicles. They're worth more than you can imagine." The second voice grunted in agreement. "We're not leaving without them. No one knows they're here except us." Kate's mind raced. They're not just after the vehicles, they're after something else. Something more. This is bigger than I thought. She needed to get out of there. The vehicles, the bunker, the hidden history, it all suddenly felt like it was more than just an accidental discovery. It was a key to something powerful, and someone would stop at nothing to get their hands on it. She turned, looking for a way out. Her eyes scanned the shadows, finding the faint outline of a door on the far side of the building. It wasn't much, but it was her only shot. She moved as silently as she could, every step calculated and cautious. But just as she reached for the door handle, a voice behind her made her freeze. "I wouldn't do that if I were you." Kate spun around, her breath catching in her throat. Standing in the doorway was a tall man, his face obscured by the shadow of his hood. He wasn't alone. Two others flanked him, their eyes sharp and cold. "You've been poking around places you don't belong," the man said, his voice low but threatening. "This is bigger than you, sweetheart. I suggest you walk away before things get complicated." Kate's mind raced, her instincts screaming at her to run. But she stood her ground, her mechanic's resolve hardening. She wasn't going to back down. Not now. Not when she was so close to uncovering the truth. "What do you want with the vehicles?" she asked, her voice steady though her heart pounded in her chest. The man's lips curled into a smirk. "You don't need to know that. All you need to know is that you're in the way." Kate's pulse quickened. She had to think fast. There was no way she was walking away from this without answers. She took a step back, her eyes scanning the room for anything she could use as a weapon. But before she could make her move, the man raised his hand, signaling to his companions. "We don't want trouble," he said. "We just want what's ours." Kate's mind was racing. They didn't seem like ordinary thieves. There was something far more organized, more dangerous about them. They weren't here for the money or the vehicles. They were part of something bigger, something hidden. Her options were limited, and as the man stepped closer, Kate realized she needed a plan. Fast. She feigned a hesitant step back, then quickly lunged toward a stack of crates. The man's eyes widened in surprise. But by the time he reacted, Kate had already pulled a wrench from her bag and swung it hard at the nearest crate, sending it tumbling with a loud crash. The noise reverberated through the room, and for a split second, the man and his two companions froze. That was all the time Kate needed. She bolted toward the door, not looking back, her heart thundering in her chest. She heard them shouting behind her, the sound of footsteps pounding against the gravel. But she didn't stop. She couldn't stop. The stakes were higher than she had ever imagined. She wasn't just dealing with thieves, she was up against something much darker. And the secret she had uncovered was far more dangerous than she ever expected. Kate's legs burned as she ran, adrenaline pushing her faster than she thought possible. The sounds of the men chasing her faded into the background, replaced by the thundering of her own heartbeat. She dashed out of the building and into the overgrown woods surrounding the compound, trying to navigate through the thick brush without tripping over roots or branches. Her only thought was getting far enough away to figure out her next move. After a few minutes, the sounds of pursuit began to die down, but she didn't slow. She kept running, zigzagging through the trees, until she felt the sharp pang of exhaustion in her lungs. She slowed to a jog, then finally stopped, leaning against a large oak tree, her breath ragged as she looked over her shoulder. The men weren't following anymore. She'd lost them for now, but she knew it wouldn't be long before they regrouped. Kate wiped the sweat from her forehead and scanned the area around her. She was deep in the woods, miles from the town. Her truck was parked by the compound's entrance, but getting back there was risky. She needed to think. Pulling out her phone, Kate tried to steady her hands as she dialed the number of the only person she trusted with something this big Joe, a former military contact who had connections in places she couldn't even begin to understand. It rang twice before he picked up. "Kate?" His voice was cautious, then curious. "What's going on?" "I found something," she said, glancing around the woods as if expecting someone to jump out of the shadows. "A bunker. Old military vehicles, armored trucks, tanks, the whole damn thing. But there's more to it. I think there's a whole operation behind it, Joe." There was a brief silence on the other end of the line. Wait. You found a bunker? What are you talking about?" "I'm telling you, Joe, it's not just a junkyard. These aren't just old vehicles. They're part of something bigger. Secret military stuff. I need to know what this is, but there are people looking for it, and they're not messing around." Joe sighed, clearly deep in thought. "I don't like where this is going, Kate. But listen to me. There are a few old projects the government tried to bury. If they're after you, you're in deeper than you realize. I'll come to you. Stay put. Don't make any sudden moves." "Yeah, okay," Kate replied, trying to steady her nerves. "But you need to know this. There are papers with the vehicles. Plans, blueprints, photographs. This isn't some accident. These were meant to be kept hidden. Joe paused. I'll get there as soon as I can. Don't do anything until I get there. This is bigger than anything you've ever dealt with. Kate ended the call and leaned back against the tree, staring into the dense woods. The weight of the discovery pressed heavily on her chest. It wasn't just about the vehicles. The documents and the photos, the hidden history, they were more than she could understand on her own. The whole situation felt like a tangled web, and now that she had unraveled a piece of it, there was no way she could put it back together again. Those vehicles, the bunker, it wasn't just a hidden military operation. It was a legacy, buried and forgotten for a reason. Kate spent the next several hours pacing, too anxious to sit still. The woods were quiet, save for the distant rustle of leaves and the occasional bird call. As night began to fall, her thoughts turned back to the bunker and the documents she had found there. The blueprints, the photographs, the maps, it all pointed to something bigger. This was no ordinary discovery. She pulled out the photo of the soldiers, their proud faces standing beside a tank that looked remarkably similar to one of the vehicles in the bunker. In the corner of the picture, a faint scribble caught her eye. It looked like a name. Captain Ellis Granger. The name stirred something in her memory. She had heard it before, mentioned in passing by Joe during one of their conversations about military history. But there was no time to dig deeper into that now. She needed to keep moving. By the time Joe arrived, the night had settled in, and the air had turned cold. He stepped out of his vehicle, looking around cautiously, before making his way over to her. Kate, he said, his voice low. You're right. This is bad. But we're not just dealing with some random military surplus. This is a legacy project, one that was meant to be erased. Kate frowned. What do you mean, erased? Joe glanced around, making sure no one was listening. There were projects during the Cold War that never made it to the public eye. Some of them were too risky, too expensive, or just too dangerous. They buried the evidence, wiped the files, and put these vehicles into secret storage locations. Granger was the one in charge of it. If anyone knows about these, it's him. Her heart skipped a beat. Where is he? What happened to him? Joe shook his head. No one knows. The project was scrapped, but Granger disappeared shortly after that. Last anyone heard, he had gone off the grid. But Kate, I don't think it was just him running this operation. There were others. Others who want these vehicles back, and they'll stop at nothing to get them. Kate's blood ran cold. So, I'm not the only one looking for this stuff. No, Joe said grimly. And now, you're in the middle of it. She took a deep breath, trying to steady herself. It was no longer just about finding a hidden bunker or a forgotten treasure. She had unwittingly stumbled upon a covert operation that had been buried for decades, and now, people were coming for her, and the legacy she had uncovered. Kate wasn't just a mechanic anymore. She was now a part of a story much larger than herself. And if she wanted to survive, she would have to figure out how to navigate this dangerous game before it was too late. The night felt heavier as Kate and Joe drove back to her truck, the quiet hum of the engine a stark contrast to the storm of thoughts swirling in her mind. Every passing mile seemed to add weight to the situation, the sense of urgency and danger pressing in on her chest. The gravity of what she had uncovered was beginning to settle deep into her bones. They arrived back at her truck, parked a few miles from the compound. Kate stared at the headlights for a moment, feeling the weight of everything she had uncovered. The bunker, the vehicles, the secretive operation, and the men who were now after her. This wasn't just a random discovery anymore. She wasn't just some mechanic looking for a good find. She had become part of something dangerous, something she couldn't walk away from. Joe turned to her, his face tight with concern. Kate, I can't stress this enough. You need to be careful. There's a lot riding on this, more than we both realize. The people who are looking for those vehicles, they're not ordinary criminals. They have resources, and they won't stop until they have them. Kate nodded, but inside, her stomach twisted. Her mind kept flashing back to the faces of the men who had threatened her in the bunker. They weren't just after the vehicles, they were after the history, the legacy that had been buried for so long. And now, she had become the key to unlocking it. "Joe, I never wanted any of this," she said quietly, her voice strained. "I just wanted to fix cars. Now I'm in the middle of something I don't even understand." Joe placed a hand on her shoulder, a rare sign of reassurance. "You didn't choose this, Kate. But now that you're in, there's no going back. You've got two choices: run and hide, or stand up and fight for it. And I know you're not the type to run." Kate's throat tightened as his words sank in. She wasn't the type to run. That much was true. But the weight of what she was facing felt so much bigger than anything she had ever dealt with before. "I don't know if I can fight this," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "I'm just a mechanic. What am I supposed to do with this?" Joe's eyes softened, and he gave her shoulder a comforting squeeze. "You're stronger than you think, and you don't have to do this alone. But you've got to make a decision, Kate. You can't let fear control you. You have the truth on your side, and that's the most powerful weapon you've got." Kate stood there for a moment, trying to process everything. She had never thought of herself as a hero or someone who could fight against the odds. She had always kept her head down, focused on her work and her own small corner of the world. But now, everything had changed. The stakes had grown higher, and the people after the bunker were only a part of the story. She had uncovered something that could change the course of history, and she couldn't turn her back on it. With a deep breath, Kate finally looked Joe in the eye. "I'll do it. I'll fight. But I need your help. I don't know how to take this on alone." Joe nodded, a look of resolve in his eyes. "You won't be alone. We'll get to the bottom of this. We'll figure out who's behind all this and why they're so desperate to keep it hidden." Kate felt a surge of determination. She wasn't going to let fear control her. She wasn't going to let them take away the legacy she had uncovered. It was time to take control of the situation, no matter how big or dangerous it seemed. Joe pulled out his phone and started typing, already working on their next move. "I know a few people who can help us, but first, we need to get some answers about this Granger character, and we need to figure out who else is involved in this operation." Kate glanced down at the photograph of the soldiers, the faded image of Captain Ellis Granger and his men still haunting her thoughts. Granger had to be the key. He was the one who had orchestrated this secret operation, and if she could find him, maybe she could uncover the rest of the story. "Let's start there," Kate said, her voice steady with newfound resolve. "Let's find out everything we can about Granger, and then we'll make sure the truth gets out, no matter what it takes." Joe nodded, his expression hardening. "We're in this together, Kate. You're not backing down now, and neither am I." As they climbed into the truck and drove off into the night, Kate couldn't shake the feeling that she had crossed a line she could never uncross. But for the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of purpose, a drive to uncover the truth and fight for something that mattered. This was no longer just about old vehicles and military secrets. It was about restoring a lost legacy and ensuring that the people who wanted to bury it would never succeed. And she was ready to face whatever came next. The next few days felt like a blur, a chaotic storm of phone calls, research, and careful planning. Kate couldn't shake the feeling that the walls were closing in. The people who had chased her in the bunker hadn't given up. They were still out there, and Kate knew it was only a matter of time before they came after her again. But this time, she wasn't alone. Joe had contacted a few trusted allies, people with connections, resources, and the kind of expertise Kate needed to crack the case wide open. One of them, a former intelligence officer named Sarah, was the key. She had access to government archives, hidden files, and a vast network of people who could help track down the missing pieces of the puzzle. As Kate sat in her shop, waiting for the call from Sarah, she couldn't help but replay everything in her mind. The bunker, the armored vehicles, Captain Ellis Granger. It was all connected, and the more she dug into the history of it, the clearer it became that this was no ordinary military operation. Granger had been in charge of a top-secret project during the Cold War, a project that had been buried and erased from history. The photograph of Granger and his soldiers had become an obsession for Kate. She couldn't stop thinking about the faint scribble in the corner of the photo. The name Granger. That small detail felt like a breadcrumb, leading her to something much bigger. What had happened to Captain Granger? Why had he disappeared? And what was so important about these vehicles that they had to be hidden away for decades? The phone rang, breaking her thoughts. She grabbed it, her hand trembling slightly as she answered. "Kate?" It was Sarah's voice, steady and direct. "I've got something for you." Kate's pulse quickened. "What did you find?" "I managed to dig up some old intel on Captain Ellis Granger. He wasn't just a part of a covert operation, he was running the show. This project, the one with the armored vehicles, was more than just military hardware. It was meant to be a mobile defense unit, designed to protect the country's most sensitive assets in the event of a global crisis." Kate's mind raced. "So, it wasn't just a few abandoned vehicles?" "Exactly," Sarah replied. "These vehicles were part of a larger defense plan, a secret operation to safeguard key locations and personnel. But something went wrong. Granger and his team were compromised, and the operation was abandoned. Granger disappeared without a trace, and the project was scrubbed from the records." Kate sat back, absorbing the weight of Sarah's words. This wasn't just about stolen military hardware. It was about an entire operation that had been erased from history, an operation that, until now, had remained buried. "Do you know where Granger is?" Kate asked, her voice tight with urgency. Sarah hesitated. "I'm working on it. But there's something else. We've been digging into Granger's last known contacts, and there's one name that keeps popping up: Jonathan Barlow." "Who's Barlow?" Kate asked, already knowing the answer would be important. "He was one of the last people to work with Granger. He was involved in the operation, but when Granger disappeared, Barlow went into hiding. According to some old records, Barlow was the one who helped smuggle the vehicles into the bunker you found. He's still out there, and I think he knows more about what really happened." Kate's heart skipped a beat. Barlow was the missing piece. He was the one who could explain everything: the vehicles, the bunker, Granger's disappearance. But finding him would be no easy task. "Where do I find him?" Kate asked, determination flooding her voice. "I've got a lead," Sarah said. "Barlow's last known location was a cabin in the mountains. It's remote, isolated, but it's the only place left that hasn't been checked." Kate stood up, her decision already made. "I'll go after him." "No, Kate. This is too dangerous. You don't know what you're walking into." "I don't care," Kate replied, her voice steady but filled with resolve. "I've come this far, and I'm not turning back now. I'm going after Barlow. I need answers, Sarah, and I need to make sure those vehicles are never used for the wrong reasons." Sarah sighed, her tone softening. "I know you do. Just be careful. I'll keep working on tracking Barlow down, but if you go after him, you'll need to stay off the radar. There's no telling who else is looking for him." "I will," Kate said, her mind already racing through the plan. She had a destination, she had a purpose, and nothing was going to stop her now. As she hung up the phone, Kate felt a wave of adrenaline surge through her. This wasn't just about uncovering a secret. This was about stopping something far more dangerous from being unleashed. The vehicles in the bunker weren't just relics of a forgotten war. They were a weapon waiting to be used. Kate wasn't going to let that happen. She had a mission, and she was going to see it through. The road ahead was treacherous, but she had already crossed a point of no return. Now, all she needed was to find Barlow, get the truth, and make sure the legacy of Captain Ellis Granger didn't fall into the wrong hands. Kate's truck rumbled along the winding mountain roads, the air growing cooler as she ascended higher into the hills. The further she drove, the more isolated the terrain became, the trees growing denser, the landscape more rugged. It felt like she was leaving the world behind, stepping into some forgotten corner of the country where secrets had been buried for a reason. The cabin wasn't marked on any map. It was exactly the kind of place someone would disappear to, hidden from prying eyes. She had no idea what to expect when she arrived, but the closer she got, the more she felt that something important, and potentially dangerous, was waiting for her. By the time she reached the small clearing that housed the cabin, The sun was dipping behind the mountains, casting long shadows across the overgrown path. The cabin itself was small, made of weathered logs, with a stone chimney and windows covered by old wooden shutters. It looked abandoned at first glance. But the truck parked outside told a different story. Someone was here. Kate's heart pounded in her chest as she parked a safe distance away. She grabbed her bag from the passenger seat, making sure her wrench and flashlight were within easy reach. The cabin was quiet, too quiet, and that only made her more nervous. Whoever Barlow was, he wasn't the type to leave his hideout unattended. She approached the front door slowly, every sense on high alert. The last thing she needed was a confrontation with someone who knew she was coming. Kate knocked once, a firm tap against the weathered wood, hoping it would be enough to announce her presence without startling whoever was inside. There was no answer. She knocked again, louder this time. No response. Her instincts screamed at her to turn around and leave, but she couldn't. Not when she was this close to the answers she needed. With a deep breath, Kate pushed the door open, its hinges groaning in protest. The inside was dark and musty, but the faint light from the setting sun illuminated the dust motes dancing in the air. There was a large wooden table in the center of the room, papers scattered across it, and a few old maps pinned to the wall. In the far corner, a large bookshelf was stacked with old books and file boxes. Everything about the place screamed secrecy, like it was meant to be hidden from anyone who wasn't supposed to know about it. "Barlow?" Kate called, her voice steady, but the words felt strange as they left her mouth. "I know you're in here." For a long moment, there was nothing but the sound of her own breath. Then, from the back of the cabin, a door creaked open. A man stepped into the room, tall and weathered, his face hidden in shadow. His clothes were simple jeans, a worn shirt, boots, but there was a certain air about him, a quiet menace, the kind of person who had seen too much, done too much, to be rattled by anything anymore. Kate didn't hesitate. "I'm looking for answers," she said, her voice firm. "About Captain Ellis Granger, about the vehicles, about the operation that's been hidden for decades." Barlow's eyes narrowed as he stepped further into the light. His face was rough, covered in a few days' worth of stubble, and his eyes were hard, like he'd been on the run for too long to care anymore. For a moment, he said nothing, just studied her, as if trying to figure out what she wanted, what she knew. Finally, he spoke, his voice gravelly, full of years of secrets. "You shouldn't be here. You've uncovered more than you realize." Kate didn't flinch. "I'm not leaving without the truth, Barlow. I've seen what's hidden in that bunker, and I know what you've been trying to protect. The vehicles are only the beginning. The legacy of Granger's operation, what you tried to bury, it's still out there, and I need to know why." Barlow turned his back to her and walked over to the table, his fingers brushing over the papers scattered across it. His shoulders were tense, as if the weight of the past was bearing down on him more than ever. He sighed, his voice softer now. Granger didn't want anyone to find those vehicles. They were never supposed to be used again. Those machines weren't just built to protect, they were built to destroy. And that's the part of the operation Granger was trying to stop. Kate stepped closer, her voice steady but urgent. "What do you mean? What was Granger trying to stop?" Barlow's eyes flicked to the maps pinned on the wall. He tried to end the project before it got out of hand. Those armored vehicles were part of a larger plan, one that would have put the world on the brink of something worse than war. They were designed to carry out a defense strategy, but not one that would save lives. One that would have given power to people who shouldn't have had it. Kate felt a chill run down her spine. Who were they meant to protect? "Not protect," Barlow muttered bitterly. "Control." The people behind this project, they weren't interested in peace. They wanted dominance. Granger knew it, and that's why he disappeared. He had to take the fall, but it was too dangerous. The operation wasn't just about a few vehicles. It was about a network of power, a way to manipulate and control entire countries if things went south. Granger wasn't going to let that happen, but he couldn't stop it alone. Kate's mind raced. She had only thought about the vehicles as objects, things to be discovered and restored. She hadn't realized the scale of what they represented. Barlow turned to face her. his eyes haunted. "The people who took Granger, who took control of the operation, they'll come after you now. They'll come after anyone who knows about the bunker, about the vehicles. They don't care about history. They care about power, and they won't stop until they've erased anyone who stands in their way." Kate's pulse quickened, but there was no fear in her now. The truth was finally within reach, and it was bigger than anything she could have imagined. She had the answers she needed, but now, more than ever, she had to make a choice. Barlow stepped forward, locking eyes with her. "If you're going to stop them, you have to act fast. They won't stop looking for those vehicles. They'll burn everything down to keep their secrets buried." Kate nodded, her resolve hardening. "I'm not backing down. I'll make sure the world knows the truth, no matter the cost." The weight of Barlow's words echoed in Kate's mind as she left the cabin, her boots crunching against the gravel path. The truth was more terrifying than she had ever imagined. The vehicles, the bunker, Granger's mission. It wasn't just a buried secret, it was a ticking time bomb. The people behind this operation had no intention of letting it stay buried for long. And now, it was up to her to make sure that history wasn't erased. As she made her way back to her truck, Kate's thoughts were clouded by the gravity of what she had just learned. The vehicles weren't just tools of war, they were symbols of a much larger conspiracy, a dark legacy that could have shaped the course of the world if Granger hadn't tried to stop it. Granger's disappearance, the years of secrecy, it all made sense now. He had given up everything to keep those vehicles from being used in ways they were never meant to be. Kate had come to the cabin for answers, but she had left with something far more important purpose. She wasn't just a mechanic anymore. She was part of something bigger, and now she had the power to expose it. The world needed to know what had been hidden in that bunker. That night, Kate sat in her shop, staring at the photo of Granger and his soldiers. The faded faces of men who had once served a purpose, who had fought for something greater, now felt like ghosts. Granger's legacy was in her hands, and she wasn't about to let it slip away. Her phone buzzed, pulling her from her thoughts. It was Joe. "You okay?" His voice crackled through the line. Kate took a deep breath, steadying herself. "I'm more than okay. I've got everything we need, Joe. I'm going public." There was a long pause on the other end before Joe spoke again. "Are you sure? They'll come after you, Kate. This isn't just some story, it's a war waiting to happen." "I'm sure," Kate replied, her voice unwavering. "I've seen enough to know what needs to be done. I'm not just fighting for those vehicles anymore. I'm fighting for the truth. The world can't keep living with these secrets buried. The people behind this need to be exposed. It's time we make sure they never get their way." Joe's voice softened. "All right. You've got my back, Kate. I'll help you get the word out. But you're not doing this alone. We'll take them down together." Kate nodded, even though he couldn't see her. "I know. I've got a plan. But it starts with showing the world what's in that bunker and why it needs to stay there." The days that followed were a whirlwind of activity. Kate and Joe worked together to gather every piece of information they could find, every document, every map, every photograph that linked the vehicles, the bunker, and Granger's operation. They reached out to the right people: journalists, historians, whistleblowers, people who would be willing to tell the story, no matter the cost. By the time Kate stood in front of a camera, ready to release the information to the world, she knew there was no going back. The conspiracy had already started to unravel. The truth was out, and the people behind the operation were already scrambling to cover their tracks. But Kate wasn't afraid. She had seen the darkness that hid behind the veil of secrecy, and now it was time for the light to shine through. As the camera started rolling, Kate looked directly into the lens. Her heart raced, but there was no hesitation in her voice. "For years, the truth about a covert military operation has been hidden. But the truth cannot stay buried forever. I found what was meant to stay hidden: a bunker filled with armored vehicles, part of a legacy that should never have existed. The people behind this project wanted to control, to manipulate, to erase the freedoms we take for granted. They thought they could bury their secrets and disappear." She paused, steadying herself, her words clear and powerful. but they underestimated the power of the truth. I'm here to make sure it doesn't stay buried. The legacy of Captain Ellis Granger is more than just history, it's a warning. And I'm here to make sure it's never forgotten. Kate turned off the camera, her hands shaking slightly, but a deep sense of satisfaction settling in her chest. It was done. The story was out. Over the next few weeks, the world took notice. The media picked up on the story. The photos of the vehicles, the documents, the hidden operation, it spread like wildfire. People started asking questions. Governments began investigating. The bunker was raided, and the vehicles were confiscated. But more importantly, the truth was no longer something buried in the past. It was alive, and it was changing the future. The people behind the operation, those who had tried to keep the legacy hidden, were exposed. Arrests were made. Secrets were brought to light. And for the first time in a long time, Kate felt like she was part of something bigger than herself. Kate's shop became a symbol of resilience, not just for the vehicles she fixed, but for the legacy she had restored. The Mustang, the one that had started it all, was no longer just a project. It was a testament to the power of stories, of history, and of the fight for what was right. And as she stood in her shop one evening, watching the sun dip below the horizon, Kate knew that she had done the right thing. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but it was a road she was ready to walk. Because sometimes, it wasn't about fixing what was broken. Sometimes, it was about making sure the truth was never lost. Kate reached up, running her fingers over the frame of the Mustang, her father's old tool in hand. The keys to the past had led her here, and now, she had the power to shape the future. The end.